it doesn't immediately shout out building your cloud strategy. It actually talks here on the very first slide about cloud adoption frameworks, and this is a key tool that we use within Amazon Web Services to help our customers actually build out their cloud strategy. So, as alluded to in the introduction from Chris there, what I want to do is actually walk you through that framework at a high level, but also point out to how we typically use that, and then dive into how we actually do help customers build out their cloud strategy using that framework, that model. So without further ado, I'll press on. So what to expect from this session? Well, first of all, as I alluded to, I want to explain what the Cloud Adoption Framework, or the CAF, is. I'm interested in trying to explore with you at a high level what it's comprised of, how to use that framework, and then getting started with it. It's always difficult. That very first step down any path or any journey is always the trickiest. It's the hardest to contemplate and the hardest to actually get going. So how do we typically work with our customers to do that? And how can you think about that in your journey? And then also, right at the outset of any journey, it's always good to think about the destination and what does success look like. So we'll be covering each of these topics throughout the session. So cloud adoption journey, it may seem odd coming from a technology company such as Amazon Web Services to be talking about things other than the IT, but typically what we find is that with many of our customers, where we're privileged to be able to come and talk with you and work with you and engage with you, actually before it gets to technology there are so many non-technology questions that need to be addressed. So customers are asking us for what enterprise-wide guidance. They're asking us questions around the business impact, how design foundations should be approached, how to structure a cloud program, how to actually attack this seemingly large beast or this major journey that they're going on, what skills and capabilities might be required, what should the priorities be based on where that company or that organization is at this current point in time. Some of the tools, and invariably also what are some of the risks, what are some of the security concerns that might be out there. None of these are actually specifically about AWS or cloud technology pieces necessarily, but all of them pertain to how they might be used. So the Cloud Adoption Framework, the CAF as it is often known within the AWS world, is a framework, as the name suggests. It's a tool for prompting thorough planning and completeness of design. As a framework and as a prompt, it's not prescriptive. It has a bunch of elements within it that we'll touch on briefly here that allow you to actually start to explore some of those concerns that I alluded to on the previous slide. It consists, not surprisingly given the graphic on the right-hand side of that slide, of 7 perspectives. Each of those perspectives provide nudges or aide-memoirs or tools or approaches to actually going on a step-by-step process to build your cloud roadmap. It then helps with the execution and the delivery approach beyond the immediate planning activities as well. There's a mountain of information about the CAF that's available to you right now publicly on the AWS website, and I've included a couple of links down there as to where you can find out more. Broadly around the CAF framework itself, some materials, and then specifically there's a very useful white paper that's available as a PDF along that second link that you have there. So I encourage you after this webinar, if you are interested and you find that this is a good prompt and an interesting direction you need to take, to actually go and look at those materials and explore the CAF further. But let's actually have a look at what those perspectives of the CAF are, as alluded to by the honeycomb pattern that you've seen a couple of times already. The questions that I was posing just before, the typical questions that we hear from customers and that we see in organizations approaching the cloud, over time we've distilled those into these 7 perspectives, and not surprisingly the names of these perspectives are very much aligned with the types of questions that we hear. So the business perspective, the platform perspective, maturity, etc. The CAF organises and describes these perspectives for the purposes of planning, creating, managing and supporting a modern IT service. It's a practical guidance. As I said before, it's not prescriptive. It's one where you can actually take appropriate elements which are pertinent to your organisation and use those as tools or prompts to actually start the process of planning and then execute against that. Importantly, it provides a structure where business and IT can work together towards a common aim. And this is particularly important as we find time and time again, and I'll touch on a couple of times through the rest of this session. It's important not to consider a cloud journey as purely an IT activity. It's one where the business needs to be engaged and needs to be central to the activities as well. And the CAF aims to do just that. So again, I'd refer you to the materials that we have online and that are freely available via our website, via the links that I mentioned before. But just at a very high level, here are the different perspectives of the CAF explained a little further. It's also important to note at this stage that this is not a static, rigid framework that will never change. We've developed it over time based on thousands of customer engagements, and we continue to refine the contents of this and also the tooling associated with each of the different perspectives and some of the subcomponents within them. So stand by. These things will inevitably evolve over time. But essentially, if we go through them, the business perspective, not surprisingly, it looks at aspects such as IT strategy and value management, cost management, and invariably this is where the business case components of a cloud journey need to be looked at. The essential information required for such an output developed and all brought together in a business framework. There's the platform perspective. This is the technology piece largely. This is about how do I actually start to build my environments in an AWS cloud environment? How do I replicate what I might have? How do I innovate in new ways to make use of public cloud services such as those offered by AWS? Maturity perspective, on the other hand, it actually includes a bunch of ideas around actually understanding where you are in your cloud journey. How mature is your thinking? What kind of information do I have at hand to be able to kick the process off? And also, ongoing, how I can measure success, how I can measure how I'm traveling against the plans that I've put in place. One area that I'm particularly passionate about, and again we will touch on this later, is the people perspective. This is really the people who will be involved in this process, the people who will be impacted by this process, whether they be technologists in your IT department or whether they be business consumers elsewhere in your organization. Understanding how they will react to, behave, be a part of, sponsor, and a whole variety of other human-mediated activities around this journey is really vital to get right from the beginning and then to continue to monitor and measure through the process. The process perspective is very much around the process of managing IT, the operationalization of this new way of thinking. You'll typically have processes in place which actually manage and govern your IT systems right now. Some will remain unchanged. Many may need to change. Others may need to be fundamentally taken in different directions. This is where the process perspective helps you with that. Security, I'll mention this again, it's job zero in any IT environment, and particularly in a cloud environment, not least because of the tools that are available to you to make this very, very real. And finally, the operating perspective. How do I actually operate and govern this new world of IT that we'd be moving into with a cloud transition? So, how do customers use the CAF to develop a roadmap? We use this with customers across all sizes, different industries, public sector. There's no particular limit to who can use this, except that each organization will inevitably use it in a different way. As I said at the outset, cloud adoption is a journey. So it's important to actually start understanding what your current state is. and state that destination needs to be. So on the very beginning of any journey such as this, current state information and the status of your current environment needs to be understood. Typically, some of the challenges that you want to overcome in a cloud journey might be high upfront costs, expenses associated with keeping and securing your infrastructure and your data, long time value, no value added capabilities. So this is the commoditized activity that really could be better done by a platform such as a cloud platform or specialist organizations. And often IT may not be fully aligned with the business. So it's really important right at the outset to gather information about your application and infrastructure portfolio, service providers you might have in place, service contracts you might have in place, licenses that might govern what you can and can't do with your software and hardware. And then in the desired state, it's really important to understand what your motivations are to use cloud platforms in that target state. What your objectives are around things like security and improving the levels of security you might have, the agility and improving time to value that is often the benefit of moving to a cloud environment, and then being able to focus on your core business as opposed to necessarily having to manage large data centers with large amounts of on-premise equipment, and fundamentally being an enabler of the business rather than simply a roadblock or an inhibitor to rapid, agile movement in the business world. It's also important to understand your strategy and your market drivers. This is the environment that your organization sits in, whether it be an industrial organization, a commercial organization, a public sector organization. You need to understand what some of the fundamental business drivers are that are going to direct your cloud strategy. What is the business strategy? All too often, IT doesn't actually surface out of the weeds of managing the day-to-day issues of IT to really understand what the business strategy, what the overall direction of the organization is, and how IT can be more than simply an enabler, but really a key to success and a driver of innovation and providing the ability for those organizations to really move forward according to their business strategy. Nonetheless, it's also important to think about what the market drivers and innovation needs are of your organization. What's happening around your organization? Why is agility and innovation potentially important to you? And similarly with industry drivers. So fundamentally, it's a matter of collecting data and priorities, but also understanding the opportunities and threats that surround your organization. And remember that this is not technology for the sake of technology. It's fundamental to actually enabling your business to be successful. So the key activities in this stage, not surprisingly, develop your cloud strategy aligned to business requirements, as I've just emphasized. Be ready to engage stakeholders. This is really truly fundamental to everything which is that everybody travels on that journey with you, whether they be IT or, most importantly, your business stakeholders as well. You need to communicate the value of this process to the business, and you need to define measurable goals that allow you to both monitor your success and your movement down this path, but also facilitate that, that communication of the value back to the business as well. So begin by understanding your business objectives and constraints. Start with the reasons for embarking on this journey. What's the competitive advantage in the market that you can open up through this process? Is it the ability to move quickly or the ability to out-innovate a competitor? What about reducing the cost of traditional IT? This is often a motivator for many companies, but you need to be realistic as well. You need to realistically evaluate what your current cost of ownership is of your equipment, your infrastructure, your applications, etc. and truly dive deep on where you're at, what your spend is, and then compare appropriately to the more transparent cloud version of those costs. You may need to adapt to market changes very quickly. So this is where reacting to global volatility, market changes might be a motivator for you. Understand exactly what those are and how that will impact the overall strategy. And then fundamentally, as I was emphasizing just before, don't do this purely for the sake of IT, but do understand that you have to have an IT and business strategy in place. What about your organization's capabilities? Every organization is different. Every organization has a different cadence to innovation. Every organization is starting from a different point, whether that be a greenfields organization or one that has to transform in a massive way across many different regions and capabilities. So understand your organization's size and complexity, and across the dimensions of business and the IT functions within that organization. You need to understand what your regional and global footprint is, and this may be Business Management 101, but it's certainly one that you have to be clear on what your governance structures are at the moment and what they are desired to be or need to be in the future as you move out to cloud, and whether that in fact potentially moves from a regional to a global disbursement of capability. What's your operational maturity? Hopefully in the age of ITIL and many other management sciences around IT, operational maturity in most organizations has strengthened significantly. Nonetheless, everyone's on a different scale, and each organization needs to truly look at what their ability to change is, what their ability to change their operations are, and also the readiness to be able to make that happen. Centralized and decentralized IT, similar to the regional and global footprints, but in different dimensions. Again, what are your governance structures needing to be? What are they at the moment? Your internal culture, is it reticent to change, or is it actually one where the entire organization embraces innovation very readily? And then finally, a startup versus a well-established business. Again, this is the discussion about whether you're a greenfields organization or one that needs to transform significantly. Business and IT do not operate in a friction-free isolation. There's no doubt about it that many organizations, if not all, at least have competitive landscapes that they have to operate within. Many then also have industry and government-specific regulations that they have to understand and abide by. So what is the regulatory environment that you inhabit and your organization needs to abide by? That said, don't assume that regulators are blockers. We're finding more and more across the world regulators understand the notion of cloud and actually embracing it, and certainly not necessarily standing in the way of it. Of course, there's a whole spectrum of different outcomes there and different requirements, but it's important not to assume that a regulator is going to be a blocker, but to explore it openly with them. Compliance and governance, it's still important in a cloud world. The cloud world is not magic. There isn't a police force sitting in the cloud that you can rely on. The requirements of your organization and of the regulatory world that you're in will still apply, but there is rich tooling available in the cloud platform that allows you to actually fundamentally change the way you go about managing compliance and governance. And then technology adoption rates. Your internal technology adoption rates, but also in many industries, independent software vendors, ISVs, may have different levels of readiness to actually help port their applications to the cloud environment. This is something you need to be fully aware of. And then really understand where you are today. Often enterprises have done this by system or by business unit, but rarely at a whole of IT level. So this, at the beginning of a cloud transformation journey, is a really important concept to actually understand how you intend to transform holistically. Look at the baseline. What are the characteristics of the current environment in order to get there? So fundamental activities in this phase: assess your current capabilities, really understand what your application portfolio looks like, what the talents, the human resources are in your organization or that you have to hand through third parties. What's your operational readiness, and what's your current architecture, and what does it need to be? Define those gaps realistically. It's important not to assume, but to measure and to be realistic about what those gaps may be and where you might need help or where you might need upskilling of your own people to be able to do that. And then fundamentally, to achieve that, workshops, which I'll come back to in a moment, are fundamental to actually really gaining insights from all stakeholders in this kind of a process. The final output would be a plan that you then execute against. So as you'll see in this very high-level diagram, I've put the 7 perspectives offered by the Cloud Adoption Framework down the left-hand side, and then in swim lanes across different phases, space for specific activities to be pinned against those and to be planned against for execution. It may seem quite daunting to have a blank canvas such as this to then actually put an entire transformation program or a cloud transformation journey against. But this is actually an area where within professional services, within Amazon Web Services, we actively engage with and help our customers. And this kind of a plan actually often is the major outcome of an initiative that we call our Cloud Adoption or CAF workshops, where we actually spend time on the ground with customers, taking them through the planning process that I've just spoken about, and ending up at the end of the day with an entire plan to get things moving, or to continue a transformation program and avoid a stall, or any other objectives that might be apparent in the analysis that's done within your organization. So, typical first steps. What should be pinned on that and proving side of the previous diagram that I showed you? Skills assessment. Coming back to the people perspective that I talked about, people are often our most important asset. Many organizations quote this as being most frequently as being a fact within their organization, that people are their most important asset. So it's incumbent on us, for the success of a program such as this cloud transformation program, to make their success central to the plan as well. First of all, assess your cloud computing skills and competencies. Look at your people. Clarify the organizational goals and the objectives that align with the strategy that you've mapped out. What does success look like? What does the organization that can run this new cloud environment need to look like? What are the gaps again? How does it need to transform? Look at your people. Look at them as a resource that can be further enabled. There's significant talent in any IT organization, and with appropriate training, their skills can be uplifted, changed, and for what it's worth, particularly your people can be enabled and plan their careers further based on the transformation that you are bringing to your organization. Look at the baseline skills and competencies that are required and measure these as in their current format, and measure them over the time that you're actually running your cloud transformation process and your journey. Typical outcomes of this particular phase: a capability assessment across your organization, often compiled in conjunction with HR, Training needs analysis. How do you need to uplift the capabilities of your people? What training do they need to attend? Is it specific training? Is it domain training? Or is it more broader technical training? Map out a training roadmap for them, and then aim to actually close the gaps in the skills and the competencies required for this journey. Another key step is the foundational services setup. The cloud fundamentally has a low barrier to entry. It costs very little to actually get going. It's an environment which can fundamentally be reconfigured and potentially disposed of very, very quickly, and then reconfigured again, disposed of, so in effect allows iterations. But nonetheless, there's value in getting foundation services and configuration right. Fundamental services in a cloud environment, particularly an enterprise cloud environment, enable other projects to be very fast followers. So once you have an idea of the applications that you need to move across, it's far more straightforward for the teams associated with those applications to do their job if the guardrails are in place and fundamental services for your organization are already enabled and well understood. Nonetheless, it's really important to avoid the old analysis paralysis. Because of the fluid nature and the ready reconfigurability of a cloud environment, it is possible to correct mistakes. So rather than spending large amounts of time, extended periods, potentially months or dare I say even years in defining standards associated with your cloud deployments, start to experiment and iterate. So the fundamental foundation services setup is designing to implement the foundation services that will make pilot activities, those first movers, successful, and then taking feedback from them to actually iterate those foundation services as well. Often we see in successful cloud transformations, the very first steps are setting up what we call a cloud center of excellence. This is a core team of capability which can, on the one hand, define these foundation services, but then also act as the name implies, a center of capability, a center of excellence for actually enabling applications and other services to move across on top of what's been established already. So the key activities, review the current state of architecture. You need to know what you have at the moment and what you need in the future. Are you planning on moving only digital applications or services across? Are you a large enterprise that fundamentally will have some level of hybrid IT capability requirement? That's partially on-premise and partially in the cloud. Or even if you're an all-in organization and deciding to move all of your workloads out to the cloud, this will take time, so inevitably you will go through some kind of a hybrid phase in amongst all this. What does that look like? What are the changes and how do you adapt to them, and what does your foundation architecture need to do to support those? Typically in the foundation setup, network architecture design is a very, very early task. Fundamentally in the cloud, network defines your footprint in the cloud environment. So it's important to get this right, to understand whether it's a cloud-only environment, whether it's interconnected with your on-premise environment, and what some of the security features of that connectivity need to be. So no surprises, the very next step there is to integrate security and operations within AWS. We talk about security as being job zero. It's fundamental, it's foundational, and therefore needs to be addressed at this very early stage as well. How will you operate security based on the requirements that you have, and how will you leverage the tools that are available to you in the cloud environment to best optimize that security posture? And then, as I alluded to before, in the Cloud Center of Excellence capabilities, not just setting the scene and building the foundations, but then assisting with migrating a small number of applications, whether it be 1, 2, or a handful of applications out to that foundational environment. This is fundamental to actually building confidence within your organization that this can be done, both from a technical perspective but also from a people enablement perspective, and it aids learning and the subsequent iteration of the foundation services, and also the other plans that you have for moving other workloads out to the cloud. So the outcomes, fundamentally, the implementation of those key services that will underpin many of your workloads as they move out to AWS. Identity federation with AWS is often a key piece. Again, this speaks to some of the hybrid capabilities that you might need. And then also establish audit controls in the cloud. It's important that things don't go out of control and that you do have visibility of what's deployed, and you do have governance and compliance requirements met in what you deploy out there. So right from the outset, use the platform services to enable the audit controls that you need out there. So you've set the scene, you've enabled your people, you've looked at what your foundational services need to be. What about the workloads? The application portfolio assessment is also a very typical, very early piece, particularly in large enterprises where you may have many hundreds, if not thousands, of applications and workloads and environments and supporting capabilities that need to move out to that cloud environment. So right from the outset, you'll need to be looking at what that portfolio looks like in order to dimension the problem, but then also look at that portfolio to be able to identify different pathways of getting services out to the cloud environment. Many applications are readily redeployable in a cloud environment. Some may have particular requirements, whether they be technical or license-oriented, that need to be addressed. It's important to understand and get these out in the open right at the outset. And then there's some applications where it might be important that you better use cloud services more directly, and there may be a re-architecting element involved in them. And then, no surprise, there may actually be applications in your organization that should ideally be deprecated simply because they no longer have business relevance or are complex to maintain and have only marginal business value to you. All of these things come out as you look at the application portfolio, as you collect the data, as you assess it, and importantly, that final bullet point there under the key activities, review those findings with your stakeholders. Again, we don't do IT for the sake of IT, we do it for support of the business, and it's really important that the business stakeholders, the owners of these applications, are involved in that thought process as to what best happens to a given application as it moves out to the cloud. So, no surprise, the outcomes of this kind of activity are an application portfolio analysis, typically a spreadsheet or database of information about everything that's known about your full portfolio of applications, both on a business level but also on a technical dimensional level. How virtualized are they? Are they VMs that are supporting these applications at the moment? Are there technical issues in migrating them? What processing requirements are there? What operating system requirements might there be, etc. It's also important, as I alluded to before, the cost-benefit analysis against these. Where business value doesn't exist for a given application, it probably doesn't make sense for that to actually continue to exist in your IT portfolio in the future. But again, this has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And you should be identifying what the prioritization of the migration of those workloads should look like. No surprise, typical IT program planning, look for the low-hanging fruit. Those things that can boost confidence, can inform your teams and can get things going are obviously early candidates. Those where there may be gnarly technical or license-oriented issues, they may be put later. But don't forget the business value aspect to this as well. If there's strong business value associated with a given application and it has a long lifetime in the organization and will benefit very, very quickly from a cloud environment, then naturally that would be prioritized higher. So finally, let's look at what success might look like. A question might be, what are the key ingredients of the secret sauce of a successful cloud journey? What do we see time and again in those successful implementations? No surprises on this slide. I've mentioned sponsorship a couple of times during this discussion. Executive sponsorship is key. We see that the most successful cloud transformation programs have very senior executive sponsorship, typically from the CIO, the CTO of the organization, who is often directly involved in the governance of the cloud transformation and takes an active day-to-day, week-in, week-out interest in how progress is being made. Those without the executive sponsorship tend to devolve into detail, tend not to deliver against value, and often may be prone to stalling. So executive sponsorship is really fundamental to driving a cloud program, both to success but also at speed to success. A cloud-first strategy based on your vision, incented team members following the lead is also really, really important. If it tends to be a vastly more unfocused, hybrid, what if, why don't we try this, and lacking in executive sponsorship situation, again, it might be prone to a stall. Principles and standards. I mentioned earlier that the cloud environment is a fundamentally easy place to get started. It's also a place where many things are possible. Therefore, it's important to identify what the guardrails are to what you want to implement, so that you have a directionally correct nature to the transformation program and not wheeling off into potential science projects which could come unstuck and consume time and not deliver value. So I use the word guardrails, not blockers. It's really important to set the scene for what's possible, how moment in time, and they should have some core capability around compute, network technologies, security, and the applications that you are looking at shifting out to a cloud environment. They should also have some support from other parts of the organization, whether it be legal, governance, and procurement, to help facilitate and to remove blockers that they may encounter from non-technical aspects of what they need to do. The CCOE typically needs to report to the CIO or CTO, to that executive sponsor, and not be lost in the organizational structure of a large IT organization where, again, they may be prone to being seen as either an elite or as being something of a science project on the periphery of the core business of your IT organization. Make them strong, give them a strong sponsorship, and then allow them to do their job. Organizational change, we've touched on this a couple of times already. Define what your new operating models, policies, processes, and economics are, and then provide the training for your people, technical and non-technical, to be able to enable that. And then finally, have a very clear adoption roadmap. Start small, iterate, measure, manage, update the plan, iterate, learn. These are all fundamentals to actually continuing to build velocity across your cloud program, and continuing to learn from everything that's gone before. So that's probably a lot to take in at this point. It's a complex journey. Within AWS, we have various ways that we can assist you in this. The professional services practice of which I'm a part is delighted to work with customers across all of these transformation activities and in depth into the technical aspects of what you need to do in those transitions to cloud. Meanwhile, we also have a variety of resources within AWS, whether it be online labs and training, instructor-led courses, and AWS certification, which you can apply to your organization and better enable your people through. And I'd very strongly encourage you to take advantage of those, whether they be online or engaging in the training and certification programs that we run in our offices and through third parties as well.